Welcome to the Value Maker podcast. My name is Ryan Purvis. I'm your host, supported by Heather Bicknell, as we meet with the people that make the digital workspace work. It's about the technology, it's about improving people's work experience and finding the return on value. Welcome, Collin, to the Value Makers podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great to be here. Collin Graves. I'm the founder and managing partner of North Labs. I've been in the cloud data analytics realm for the last 17 years, really focusing on helping manufacturing and industrial organizations improve their operations and their profitability by leveraging data, automation, and AI. So obviously AI is a very popular subject today, and it's taken a little bit different form in the last few years, but we've been leveraging those technologies for organizations. We just crossed our 1,000th workload mark a
Oh,
few
wow.
months ago. So we've delivered not 1,000 customers yet, but we've delivered 1,000 workloads for organizations all over the world, mostly in North America and mostly in the manufacturing and industrial realm, which is very wide reaching and very supply chain or asset intensive, which makes data very valuable.
Since you've been to my home country, I would ask you, how would you explain what you do and how do you add value to someone standing around the braai?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've really become sort of a hybrid management consulting firm over the years. I think when I started the company, it was definitely a continuation of my last firm, which was we're going to focus on just data workloads and cleaning data and making it usable and excellent. And we've really taken on this hybrid role where now we use data in everything that we do, but we're really coming in to help businesses improve their operations, improve their supply chain, improve their profitability and their revenue by using data. So it's taken sort of a supporting actor role in our conversation, which has allowed us, frankly, to, I think, appeal to more organizations in more industries who might not say, you know what, Ryan, we really don't need a data lake house right now. We don't really have a pressing need for super advanced analytics. Now we're really coming in saying, where's your business struggling? Because our hypothesis is that if you can collect data around it and measure it, you can improve it. And so really that's our bread and butter, is helping businesses improve their operations, improve their efficiencies by leveraging data, automation, and AI.
Yeah. Makes total sense to me. I mean, if you look at a lot of the sort of products you buy in the market, unless you've got somebody there to help you get the insight from it and take action from it, it's not useful. And businesses are lean and mean, and they don't have the time capacity to do it themselves. They need somebody to come in and help them.
Absolutely. I mean, what we see from most organizations is that, let's be frank, most organizations are pretty good at, say, financial analysis, because that's what we're used to. We're used to analyzing a profit and loss statement. We're used to analyzing cash flow statements and things like that. The question becomes, what levers are available within the business to improve those numbers? So we can take that data and instead of saying, okay, our profit is trending downward over the last 4 quarters, it puts us in a position to ask why. And then what can we do about it? And by doing scenario planning, or what we call what if analysis. So being able to see how changes earlier on in the organization can create that chain reaction that leads to higher profitability, higher throughput, more efficiencies, that sort of thing.
And your success criteria with the customer, is there a common pattern that you see that you can walk in and say, okay, we know how we're going to be successful here?
We'll work with anyone as long as the mission is there and as long as we think the problem statement is very valid. We've got a lot of sharp folks from a diverse range of industries, but there are a few that really stick out to me. One is manufacturing, because there are trends going on in manufacturing that are common to just about every organization. So you think scrap rate, right? What percentage of my material or my products as they're coming off the line are either being sent back to be reworked, or they're being tossed over my shoulder into the scrap heap and sold for pennies on the dollar?
Yeah.
Predictive maintenance, right? organizations in the manufacturing space spend a considerable sum of money with unplanned downtime of their machines. If a core machine breaks, we can't produce our products. That's lost revenue, that's lost product. And now we're carrying all of our staff, all of our employees, all of our supply chain with an underperforming assembly line or underperforming throughput. So a couple of things there for sure. And then where we're really starting to see a trend is in the higher ed and university space. So
Okay.
in America, at least, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, higher ed institutions are facing sort of a point of reckoning right now where enrollment is dropping and retention is dropping.
Yeah.
So, how might we apply predictive models to a student body on campus to not only attract the most valuable new students, but actually use predictive models to figure out which students are at risk of leaving after the year, which students are at risk of not completing their degree requirements and that sort of thing. So we can, instead of spending equal time and attention on every student, some are going to leave no matter what. How can we
Yeah.
identify that cohort that's at risk, but has the potential to be retained with just a little bit of work? So it's really interesting. And one of our principal architects comes from a long background in data for education, and he's really helped build out that practice for us. But it's, as someone who took a very obscure path through the university system after the military, I never
Yeah.
thought I would be working in the higher ed space, but we're certainly seeing some themes emerge.
It makes me think of anything that's been industrialized. It's a factory process. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the book called The Goal. I know you've read the book.
Love it.
Yeah. And it's all those things. And it's a great book for anybody trying to get their head around data and doing things out of the normal approach, to think about things different ways. And I read the follow-up books, but they weren't as good as The Goal,
Yeah,
I thought. And that when I read your website, I was thinking, I wonder if this is one of those people that's read the book and then modeled their business around the same premise.
absolutely. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. And now that I know that you're aware of the book, I might change that first question you asked me a little bit. Really, at the end of the day, our job is to help organizations solve their constraints by
Yeah.
leveraging data analytics, automation, and AI. Because constraints are present in every business, they never go away. It's like a game of whack a mole, right? As soon as you solve one constraint, the most important one, two more pop up. And now you're focused on solving those. So, really, it's a matter of how do we create visibility across that operating environment of that business to identify those constraints and do something about it. And really, I think that those three things I mentioned, data, automation, and AI, are the best possible way to solve those constraints.
Oh, I love how you said that, because that's exactly what we do with value as well, is we look for the constraints. We focus the work onto removing those constraints. More advisory, maybe than how you do it. We wouldn't necessarily get into the algorithms and stuff. And the data is important to us, but we're not getting into training the algorithms. We just want the decision point data, help make
Right.
decisions better.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So what's one of your good stories about how you've helped a business? What comes to mind?
Yeah. There's one that comes to mind particularly. There's a manufacturing group it's a Finnish group, but their North American headquarters is in the Minneapolis suburbs of Minnesota, where my hometown. I don't live there now, but anyway, this group came to us. They produce like industrial HVAC products for large commercial footprints. So think sports arenas, think big business complexes, whatever the case may be. They came to us and they said, Collin, our scrap rate is currently at 23%. So almost a quarter of everything we produce is being tossed into the scrap heap. They didn't have a lot of opportunity for rework. It was, hey, if it's not correct off the line, we toss it over our shoulder into this big pile
Wow.
behind us. And so you think to yourself, okay, how are you going to solve this? So first and foremost, you create that unified data foundation. We just start collecting data around where we think the problem lies, right?
Yep.
And we were able to identify, okay, it's not happening all over the business. It's happening on one particular line. From there, we were able to identify it's not the full line, it's one particular machine on the line. And we were able to go one layer deeper and say, okay, it's not just one line, it's not just one machine, it's actually one component of one machine. There's
Mm.
something called an extruder head. And all that does is it extrudes raw material, right? It outputs raw material that gets used in the final product. So we were able to identify that when that extruder head reached a certain temperature, everything that it touched afterward turned to scrap. So their scrap issue wasn't intermittent. It wasn't, yeah, it just pops up here and there. It was no scrap for however long and then all scrap once that component got too hot. So typically, I think that's where a lot of my competitors in the space would stop.
Yeah.
Found you the data, keep an eye on it. But we were able to build a system that said, okay, we're going to keep an eye on it. And the threshold was 160 degrees. So if this extruder had got over 160 degrees, it created scrap. So we were able to keep that data flowing in, keep an eye on things. And when it got to 155 degrees, we would send an alert to what's called the cell lead, the person walking around on shift. If it got to 157 degrees, we would send another notification. And if it got to 158 degrees, we would trigger an automatic slowdown of that assembly line. So instead of going from 100% to zero, we took
Yeah.
it from 100% to 75 in hopes that it would cool off. And then if it crept up even more, we could trigger an automatic shutoff to avoid that unplanned downtime. So by doing that, it took us about 9 months to build. Their scrap rate went from 23% to 11%, which represents something like a $40 million a year net operating income gain for this particular
Wow.
organization. So it's that demonstration of we measure it and then we can do something about it with automation that really gets me excited about where industries are going.
And you moved from being reactive to being proactive, which is
That's
such a different
exactly right.
mentality.
That's exactly right. And when you talk about the theory of constraints or the book, The Goal, so anybody listening, it's a dry read, but it's a very
Oh, wow.
mind changing read. Maybe not, it's an exciting read for dorks like us, Ryan.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the whole
exactly.
idea with data is how do I go from steering the ship with monthly or quarterly bits of data, right? So
Yeah.
big changes of the wheel to instead being able to use that data to look forward on the horizon and make small adjustments, either manually or automatically, as we progress. So you go from descriptive analytics, we call it, which is very reactive,
Yeah.
to proactive leading. It's like looking in your rear view mirror in your car to actually being able to look out the windshield. We'd all rather drive that way, I'm sure. And that's really what applying these technologies does for organizations.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you were able to reduce the error rate from 23% to 11%. Two questions I had. One is, what is the goal that they'd want to get to? How much error rate would they accept as a standard practice? Could you benchmark it against other similar manufacturing and say, okay, 11% is actually normal. That's the sort of benchmark. And then I wondered, in slowing down the line, how much did you actually slow it down by? So the throughput was maybe, I don't know, 100 units a month. Then you slow it down, it's 80 units a month.
Mhm.
Versus if they shut it down, the average went from 100 to 50 because they shut the thing down. I did an analysis many years ago with a car manufacturer, and every time they shut the line down, it was $500,000, $500,000 per day. And then the restart would take them a day. So it was actually $1 million each time. And their shutdowns were not due to anything wrong with the line. It's because they weren't paying invoices on time. So the suppliers weren't delivering the parts because they hadn't paid the invoice. It wasn't even an issue with the line itself. It was actually a stupid financial administrative issue.
Interesting.
So I was wondering if on those two questions, if there was anything around that.
Yeah, it varies on the basis of what kind of manufacturing you're doing. A typical ballpark and what this customer was anchored to was if we can get below 15%, we're doing okay. If we can
Yeah.
get below 12%, we're doing great. You're always going to have some scrap, right? There are
Yeah.
humans in the process. Things don't fit into tolerances. Machines aren't exact, even though we think they are. And
Yeah.
so you're always going to have some residual scrap rate that occurs. So Yeah, that one change, we were able to get them inside of both of their goals, but it's really going to depend on the complexity of the product, of course. Like auto manufacturers are going to have a lot higher rework rate than, say, an HVAC company or a company that produces children's toys, right? It has to do with the number of inputs all coming together to create the final product. Um, so yeah, benchmarks are tough, but that general rule of thumb is around 15% or less is generally seen as acceptable. And yeah, you're exactly right. When we triggered that slowdown, I believe we took it from 100% to 75%, which sounds like quite a sizable change, but you pointed out the most important thing is how do we avoid a shutdown? That's really where the revenue is lost. When you think of even an Amazon fulfillment center, they're doing slowdowns all the time, right? Their
Yeah.
conveyor systems look like roller coasters. We do a lot of customer tours in their fulfillment centers. They're going 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And you might need to do a slowdown to where these conveyors are only going 40 or 50, but that's
Yeah.
still a heck of a lot better. It might lead to an hour later delivery time, 2 hour later delivery time, but that's a heck of a lot better than the conveyor system turning off.
And they can compensate once that device cools down, they could probably run it back to a higher speed to make up for the shortage, but they've avoided the shutdown. So I can
Exactly.
see ways you could tweak it either way. The other question I had around it was, and it ties into your analytics and how are you taking a real-time feed of data to make that, to build a sensor to be associated to that part, or is that what the work you guys had to do?
It is. Yeah. So when you think about modern manufacturing and use cases are different,
Sure.
most of our customers don't require real time data ingestion. But in this case, the customer did because things are happening in real time on the fly. Sometimes customers come to us and say, I saw even a meme about it on LinkedIn yesterday. Oh, we need a real time dashboard. Why do you need a real time dashboard? For a monthly executive meeting.
Yeah.
Or you don't, no, you don't. In that case, with modern manufacturing equipment, all of them are producing that data footprint. They're collecting data every 4 times a second from all of these sensors, and they're sending that to a historian database. And the historian database's only job is to keep time-stamped values of each of those inputs.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
very small data payloads, so you can fit
Mm,
lot
a
of
lot.
them inside of this
Yeah. Yeah.
historian database. But we can feed directly into that. So if it takes half a second for that sensor data to get routed to the historian database, and we can suck that in on a streaming basis, now you're in a position where you're able to take action, even with the system not running in the red line. You're still able to take action every, call it 5 seconds, 10
Yeah.
seconds if there's an issue. So it's plenty. That wouldn't be good enough for a trading algorithm on Wall Street, but certainly it's good enough for even a sophisticated use case like that.
Yeah. And you're probably using some sort of Kafka or something like that, where you're just taking the data in and it's be time sequenced anyway. And then real time, I remember these conversations from a solution I built years ago. Real time, but actually, real time is always relative. It could be 15 minutes is real time, which is better than the once a day calculation that you'd get out of an old ETL process that's
Right.
running.
Yeah. And most customers still come to us and say, well, we need something real time. But once you dig into the business case, real time to them, like you said, is if we could have this every hour, every 15 minutes, that's what we want. And for those of us in the space, 15 minutes in computer time is an eternity,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't actually need to be real time, which cuts their costs a lot. Because if you need to build a system that's truly real time, now you have a lot of sophisticated technology, and there's a lot of reinforcing you have to do at that
Mm,
ingestion and transformation layer. But if it's every 15 minutes, the machine just goes in the machine's mind, in the computer's mind, that's once every 20 years in
yeah.
people time, right? And it grabs all that data, does its thing, and it's very manageable, and we can keep costs down for customers.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you building something in your own cloud hosted environment on your own product that's connecting into a customer, or are you building something inside the customer's environment to solve their problem? Or does that depend on the customer?
Yeah, we have both options. It really depends on what the customer wants. So I find that probably 30% of our customers just go, I don't even want to know how this thing works. Just produce the value, make it happen. And the other 70% go, yeah, we don't have the team for it today. North
Mm.
Labs is really going to act as our fractional data team in this circumstance, but we want to have the ability to own that intellectual property or own that capability for the sake of our enterprise valuation, for example. It really depends, but we bring a lot of pre-built infrastructure, pre-built data models to the table to really try and help accelerate what our internal KPI is, time to initial value for our
Yeah.
customers. And so our internal goal is, okay, the day Ryan signs, yes, they need to get us access to their systems. Yes, there's some administrative stuff. We want to deliver that first light bulb moment for Ryan within the first 45 days of us being engaged. That's our internal capability. And typically, I think we average somewhere between 30 and 40 days. Is like we're
Yeah.
sitting down and we're showing you new capabilities, even if they're not fully baked out, where you go, wow, okay, I get it. So we find that's a really good metric for us to leverage for customer success and retention.
Yeah. And I think it's a good time frame. That's roughly what, 6 weeks, assuming you can get access. Yeah. I could see that being, I remember working on a certain technology that they needed about 30 days to collect the data and do some calculations for you. And often that's the time that you're learning about the business and understanding their drivers and who the people are, and we trying to understand their perceptions of the data. Because often that's the problem, is everyone doesn't, no one, oh, I said no one believes, but often the problem with data is people don't believe the source. And you're trying to understand why they don't believe the source, because it's instinct and gut and emotions and
Yeah, you
that
hit the
stuff.
nail on the head. That our sort of core operating principle for all of our delivery teams is at the end of the day, yes, we're trying to create very sophisticated capabilities, but the primer for that, the foundation for that is building trust in organization's data, because that's really where you can win or lose as far as the people involved in the project are concerned, right? Ryan's CEO may say, hey, we're going to be data driven. And Ryan goes, yeah, okay, all of our data is nonsense. I'm going to keep using this Excel spreadsheet that's on my computer that I update once a quarter because I trust that. And where we see a lot of organizations fail with building capabilities like this is they try to do too much too quickly
Oh
and
yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
actually establish that trust in the data. You really need stakeholders like, say, Ryan in the business to look at even that earliest capability, even if it's a fraction of what it will eventually be. And we need Ryan to say, yeah, this makes sense. This aligns with my view, my understanding of how the business works. If you don't get that, then Ryan will write that solution off for the foreseeable future and won't adopt it and will stay in
Mm.
his continue doing what he's been doing, which ultimately leads to poor adoption. And ultimately, like we're seeing with the industry statistics, that data program will be deemed a failure. I think we're at like an 80% rate that executives are saying their data capabilities are either underperforming or failed, at least in the studies in the US that I've read. So 4 out of 5 are building capabilities that don't ultimately do what they're intended to do. And that's really what we're hoping to solve.
Yeah. And I think that's the trick to this, is you're coming in with some pre-built, or you've got experience, you've got some patterns you've seen before. Your time to value for a customer is shorter because you're not learning from scratch. The customer trying to hire a whole bunch of people to do this stuff ends up paying a premium for a lot of people. And then they still have to go through that learning process. So look, there's a few angles to your value proposition that I would think of.
Yeah. When we see customers take a route different than working with us, typically it's, hey, I'm going to go hire a chief information officer or a chief data officer. What's the
Yeah.
first directive? Chief data officers aren't going to roll up their sleeves and say, okay, I'm ready to build. First of all,
Yeah.
very few of them have built these capabilities from scratch. Most people in their career are inheriting existing technology. But that first directive is going to be, okay, I need to hire this many data architects, this many data engineers, this many analysts, this many project managers. So now you're talking about a multi-million dollar investment before you ever see any gain from
Yeah.
that business proposition. And then, like you said, you have to factor in the time it takes for these people to get used to working together, to put a plan together, to actually implement on the plan, and hopefully they get it right the first time. So now you're talking about millions of dollars over several years before you're actually achieving those same outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm curious to know, do you get involved in building the business case for the customer so that you can articulate that value, or are they coming to you with a business case and you're saying, you're almost assessing the business case against what you're seeing in the data?
That's a good question. We've gotten really good at building out the business cases. And most of the time, let's be honest, customers are coming to us saying, hey, my scrap rate's too high. Hey,
Yeah, yeah,
my student retention is falling year over year, and we're losing grant money from the federal government, whatever the case may be. So they
yeah.
understand where the pain is. But just like a doctor, you're not going to go to the doctor and go, oof, my elbow hurts. I think I have this. Maybe you do because you
Yeah.
spend time on WebMD, but you're coming and saying this hurts. And you're allowing the doctor to say, okay, here are some follow on questions. And actually, maybe it has nothing to do with your elbow. Maybe your elbow is just a symptom of an underlying issue. So
Mm.
that's really where my folks come in and say, okay, noted, your scrap rate is too high. But that could be personnel turnover. That could be an employee quality issue. That could be your machines being outdated
Mm.
or rusting. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an extruder head getting too hot and creating scrap. So it's really on us to peel back the layers of the onion and figure out what that root cause is.
And I'm wondering, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but how many times have you spoken to people in the business and they already know the answer and the data is just confirming it, but no one's listened to that person for months. And here you come in as the consultant and they go, we know what the problem is, but management won't listen to me because you're the consultant. They're listening to you.
It's funny. We have seen that for sure. Let's not beat around the bush, right? The people coming to us, the employees of the company are the domain experts.
Yeah.
We're data experts, but they understand way more intricately than we probably ever will
Mm.
how the business actually works. They understand the nuances, right? Not just how the system's designed, they understand how management communicates to people, which can affect the business and the output. So we see that a lot. I would say, to be honest with you, what we see even more than that is a stakeholder coming to us and going, this is the problem. And I 100% would bet my career on it. This is the issue. And you do some digging and you actually go, Brian, it's, you're on the right track, but it's actually the root cause lives over here. And now you're having to battle the ego or the sort of protectionism mindset of that person to go, there's no way I'm wrong. There's no
Yeah.
way I'm
Yeah.
wrong. So we see that quite a bit. Luckily, I think we've gotten good at pulling up a chair on the same side of the table and going, hey, because of you, Ryan, we even thought to look over here because of your esteemed understanding of the business. But
Yeah.
as you can clearly see, this is where the chain of events starts. And that's a good way to pat Ryan on the back and go, you were on the right track for sure. We're glad we're here because you'd have solved that and the root cause would have still been there. Now let's get to work on solving this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how, as much as we, from previous experience, we talk about moving away from the subjective opinion to the evidence-based opinion. And sometimes you need to have the emotional attachment to it because that does help you to back it down. But the data has to win in the end and how you interpret the data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going through almost a revolution,
Mm.
I would dare say, in a lot of industries today, where when I think about a manufacturer, I grew up around manufacturing organizations. I come from a family of manufacturing business owners. as complex as those businesses are, even a small manufacturer has an absurd number of inputs in
Mm.
order to make their business function. It's just crazy. And they've tuned their spidey senses over the years.
Yeah.
They've calibrated their gut to be able to say, I smell this, it must be this. And they've been successful doing that. And so
Yeah.
now we're coming in as complete outsiders in the business and going, Ryan, just trust what your data tells you. And sometimes your gut will be right. And sometimes your gut won't quite be right, but think about the outcome, that being able to validate that gut instinct against reasonable, trustworthy data. Imagine how much more dangerous that makes you as an executive of the business. But there is pushback. There are a lot, especially in manufacturing. It's a laggard in terms of technology adoption. There are quite a few people out there who go, "Nah, I don't need it. I've gotten this far. We've gotten to 10 million a year in revenue, 40 million a year in revenue. What are you going to do? Give me another million?" Right? And there's a bit of an uphill battle there still, although I think the industry now is starting to come around to it.
Yeah. And the analogy I'd give to this is the Moneyball analogy, where you had 8 with no payroll, built a team using different data to everybody else. And Billy Bean, he was the sort of scout would say out of the 5 things, he had all the 5 things. He had height, he had power, he had speed, he had all that stuff, but he didn't have BMT.
Yeah,
And that you've watched the movie, I'm sure, and read the book.
of course.
But it is the same thing. And if I look at even today, how the sport still relies on the sabermetrics profession to predict players and stuff. And you have the Yankees now 3-0 down with a power team, but they just can't get over the hump at the moment. They probably will tonight, but still not my time. But it's fascinating how the numbers still play.
And but you think about my favorite part of that movie is when Jonah Hill
Yeah. I could think of the guy's name. Yeah.
completely, and it's what we just talked about. So
Yeah.
all of these domain experts in the space, Jonah Hill is not a domain expert. He was just an enthusiast in the space. He was a quant, but
Yeah.
he's sitting around a table with all of these domain experts who had
All
calibrated
the
their
scouts. Yeah.
over the years. I can look
Yeah.
at Ryan and know that he's the next Aaron Judge. But Jonah said, actually, it's on base percentage that matters. We're talking about slugging percentage. We're talking about how many home runs you're hitting, how many RBIs you're hitting. The only thing that matters is getting on base. So let's look at the guy who draws a lot of walks. Let's look at the guy who crowds the plate against a curveball pitcher who's going to get nailed by a pitch. He's on base. And that's really, that's the exact sort of thing that it gets me so excited about when we go into these businesses, because they have their identity and their sort of preconceived and accurate depiction of how their business operates. But for us to come in as the outsider quant Jonah Hill and say, look, we're not claiming to be domain experts, but it looks like this data point is actually what's driving so many chain reactions in your business.
Yeah.
And you're not measuring it or being proactive about it. That's where outsized value is gained. You can improve shipping time. You can go from FedEx 3-day to FedEx 2-day for sure. But there's got to be something earlier in the chain that's putting that finished product on the dock, wrapped up, ready to go 48 hours sooner, 72 hours sooner. So now let's save money on shipping, right? Which is otherwise going to hit our P&L. If we can deliver that product to the dock 3 days sooner because we're more efficient and we fix that constraint, now maybe we move to FedEx 4-day or 5-day, deliver at the same time and save the business money.
Yep. And I remember in that section of the movie, they were looking at trading out players and all the rest of it. And the thing that the measure they were aiming towards was how many runs could they score in a season.
Right.
And the amount of runs they scored would put them in a certain position. And obviously, from a financial point of view, the more runs they had to the level they got into the league, to the postseason, would equate to revenue for the business. And the one stat that in fact, I will find the book, I'll tell you what it's called, but it's right here, The MVP Machine, which is another book very similar. because the way that the Athletics made their money was that they would go and find the rookies that they would keep for a period of time, because a rookie got paid whatever the number was. I think it's $500,000 a year, or whatever it is. And they would be able to sell that player a price to make their money, because that player would go on to sign a big contract, but they would have got X number of years of that player at the cheap rate before they became a big player. And it's trying to find, what I find the most interesting part about what this is trying to find those numbers, the outcome you're trying to achieve with the number that you've got, as you mentioned, the revenue number or the risk reduction number or the cost save number, and then working backwards to where you are now and finding all the little levers that you've got to play with to get to that number at the end.
Yep, exactly. We see it. I'm a big basketball fan. I know I don't look like it, all 5'9", but I'm a big basketball fan. But
yeah,
we've seen that philosophy be adopted by the sort of second tier or third tier teams in the league, right? And it happens in all sports, right? But where do the most decorated, most senior players want to go? They want to play on the coast, right? They want to play in Boston, New York, San Francisco, LA, even Phoenix. They don't want to play in Minnesota or Memphis. Shout out Timberwolves, right? So the whole idea has been, now the Timberwolves are very good, but the whole philosophy since I was growing up was, how can we draft better than anyone? Now they haven't done that, but their intentions were correct to say, which of these rookies have the highest upside and how do we build a team around them? Because we're not going to be able to trade. The players have so much say where they go. You could trade your whole roster for LeBron James, and guess what? LeBron's not coming to Minnesota. So they've had to think about how to identify that outsized rookie talent.
For the layman like me, why is the coach because it's warm and better climate and better fans?
Yeah, it's just not the Midwest. Obviously, for a long time, the Chicago Bulls they dominated the NBA in the Jordan era with Scottie Pippen and Steve Kerr and all those folks, Dennis Rodman. But I think it's just generally there's more wealth on the coasts. There's bigger crowds that spend more money on the coasts. Yeah. And so you have a higher caliber franchise on the coasts. And then occasionally, like Minnesota is now, you become really good. Even the Denver Nuggets for the last few years have been great, but they're considered Rockies and Midwest. And historically, they've been very bad, very young teams that are almost training this talent, like you said, to ultimately get traded off at a profit to try and step your way up from a skill perspective. But you end up bringing up these young guns and trading them for older veterans who are maybe in the last 3 years, 4 years of their career, who can bring you a lot of value, but not for very long. And so, it's just fascinating to me how that side of sports works. And I'm sure it's similar for every sport, right? Different soccer, football clubs around the world, right? You become seen as almost that first stop for a lot of generational talent, and they'll ultimately go somewhere else.
Yeah, we see it with the South African rugby team. South African rugby players, at least. We have a factory of players coming out all the time. And in fact, we've got more players playing for other countries. And it's because they can't get into the Springboks. But also they get paid really well to play elsewhere. Right. And some of the players playing elsewhere could probably be as good as many national teams, because there's just such a high quality being produced at school level and varsity level and all the rest of it. And in fact, it's one of the reasons, and what I find fascinating about that is you compare South Africa, which has got 60 million people, and we pick from the whole population now, compared to, say, New Zealand, which is only a few million in comparison. And they also have a high caliber of player. And then you have Ireland, it's also only a few million. But they've both got their own factories working where they're actually, they're pulling out good quality players versus, say, England, which has got probably the most registered amateur players in the world. And they struggle to get, I'm not saying that they're like a terrible team, but they don't get the high quality players out for some reason.
Yeah, Minnesota is the same way where I grew up. That's a hockey capital for ice hockey. Any of the ice hockey fans listening? Minnesota as a state, has the greatest saturation across NHL rosters out of any other state. So
Yeah.
it's just I was born in Minnesota. If you're born in Minnesota, you pop out, they strap skates on you. You're
Yeah.
skating at
Yeah.
the same
Exactly.
time you learn to walk a lot of times. And we all grow up playing ice hockey. And obviously, we're very fortunate to have Canada right above us, where Canada treats hockey like we treat football and
Yeah.
basketball in the US. But my point is the Minnesota Wild have never won a championship.
Oh,
They've
really?
never, so they got all this homegrown talent within 100-mile radius around them, but they've never won a championship because those players all go elsewhere.
Yeah. It's probably one of those experiments you want to go and plot one day and see
Right.
where did they all go and where did they win?
Exactly.
And what was the,
They go to the coasts. It's the
yeah, yeah,
same
true.
as
Yeah.
it's the same as any other sport.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Great. It's been great chatting with you. Is there anything else you want to share before we go? A place to get hold of you, get in contact?
Yeah, I'm off social media except for LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. It's just /Collin with 2 L's, Collin Graves. Our website is northlabs.io or northlabs.com. You'll get to the same place. And if anybody's listening out there who is trying to figure out how to leverage data to drive improvements in their business, we actually handle that blueprinting effort, that business case effort, free of charge for customers. And so if you
All right.
go to buildmydatablueprint.com, it'll just reroute you to a specific page on the North Labs website where you can kick off a conversation with us in terms of what you're looking to solve for your business, and let our team of experts dive a little deeper with you and figure out what steps to take.
Fantastic. It's been great having you on the show and look forward
Awesome.
to seeing how you do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you for listening to our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. Help us grow our network. Please also check out our website at www.valuu.work and our product that's on there. It's something we worked really hard on. We hope that it benefits you.